morning, my friends, and welcome to another installment of reading through the Psalms in our much longer process of reading through the Bible. We have come to the place where we are in the Psalms and now reading one Psalm a day every Wednesday. I'm Pastor Lou Kilgore, and I'm happy to invite you into this journey to hear both the struggle of the psalmist and also to gain from the psalmist's experiences of faith as they live their lives. Today we are arrived already at Psalm number 11, and so it's a shorter psalm, but it's short and to the point. Many of the psalms are penned in the experience of human crisis of faith or crisis of being attacked or enemies, real or perceived, that threaten the life and the livelihood or the reputation of the believer. And this psalm it's tidy, it's neat. It describes an initial experience of fear and dread around what sounds like pretty serious threat to the life of the writer. And the commentators say the context might be that this is a conversation or a thought process that happens in the temple, but it is not a prayer. Many of the Psalms are prayers, and the discoveries that are made in the Psalms are made when the petitioner is praying. It's not the case in this Psalm. This is an observation Psalm. The scene is described, you'll hear in the beginning, and then the honest expression of the fear and the worry about what's going to happen, and then you see a thought process by which the psalmist reminds themselves of who God is and who they are in God's eyes, and then everything changes for the psalmist, for the writer. I wanted to go back. Since this is a short psalm, I think our class today will be fairly short, but I wanted to read from the psalm we did last week, which was Psalms 9 and 10. I wanted to read the commentator's summary of the lesson of those two psalms, and I think I'm going to probably put this on a plaque on my wall, because I think it addresses so much of the confusion about what is the benefit of faith. What does faith and living a life with God bring? What benefit does it bring to us? Now, before I say any more, let me read what the commentator says here. It's Peter Craigie, and he is the commentator for this series, Word Biblical Commentary on the Psalms. Belief and morality are not guarantees of happiness and stability. Belief and morality do not ensure benefits and security. Belief in God and the morality which must accompany that belief are, in one sense, their own reward. And they promise nothing more with respect to security and a trouble-free life. But in another sense, they do offer something more than just security and superficial happiness, which is characterized by the life of the wicked. They offer that continuing relationship with God, which imparts ultimate meaning to human existence, a relationship within which the psalmist writes almost all of his thoughts. It's a beautifully constructed paragraph. Belief and morality are not guarantees of happiness and stability. They do not ensure benefits and security. Belief in God and the morality which must accompany that belief are, in one sense, their own rewards and promise nothing more with respect to security and a trouble-free life. Wow, what a word for the time in which we live, in the marketing of religion and the marketing of churches and the marketing of the journey of faith, as we try to convince people to come on the journey. And like car salesmen, we make promises, and we offer things which are not part of the journey of faith. The journey of faith has built-in benefits of its own, just from being on the journey of faith. So let's turn then to Psalm number 11. The editor has called it a confidence of crisis. And I'm going to read it from the smoother translation from the NRSV, New Revised Standard Version. And then I'll also refer to the one which is here in the textual translation. In the Lord I take refuge. How can you say to me, flee like a bird to the mountains? For look, the wicked bend the bow, and they have fitted their arrow to the string to shoot in the dark at the upright in heart. If the foundations are destroyed, what can the righteous do? The Lord is in his holy temple. The Lord's throne is in heaven. God's eyes behold, God's gaze examines humankind. The Lord tests the righteous and the wicked, and God's soul hates the lover of violence. On the wicked, God will rain coals of fire and sulfur. A scorching wind shall be the portion of their cup. For the Lord is righteous. He loves the righteous deeds. The upright shall behold his face. One in the NRSV, they titled this song, Trust in the Lord and Do Not Panic. Trust in the Lord and do not panic. So let's see if we can dig in a little deeper and see what's going on here. In the Lord I have sought refuge. How can you say to me, flutter like a bird to the mountains? The advice that's being given, this person obviously has some enemies that are seeking to do them harm. Arrows are aimed at him, her. Are they physical? It doesn't matter. The effect will be the same. They seek the destruction. And advice is being given to this person to run for the hills, to fly away, like a bird would fly away. If a gun was being aimed at them or an arrow at them, the bird would flutter their wings and fly away. And in some ways, the person is saying it's too late for that. I'm already in their sights. I'm aware that I am, that I am in danger, and I'm frightened. You can hear the fear is palpable. The person, there is a distressing situation, and he's trying to reflect on what it is that he's supposed to do. He is very frightened. So, there is a despair. What has the righteous done to deserve a plight like this? There's a kind of inward first kind of self-pity that says, I don't know, what did I do to deserve this? He feels that the whole foundation of his life is being torn down. And certainly you and I both know what it feels like to stand in similar situations where something happens. It's even worse sometimes if it's something you didn't see coming. But that the whole foundation of what you've been building your life on begins to move like a house of cards. And it just seems as if everything will collapse. I can read this and I can personify this fear. I know this fear. I tend to be a worrier anyway, and I'm not proud of it, but I know how this can happen. There's a sense in which these people that the writer is talking about are hunting him. They're hunting him down. They want to see him brought down. that the interesting thing that happens is, and I don't need to belabor the whole fear and worry thing, I think all of us know what it feels like. I mean, unless you're somehow inhuman. There is this sense of an inventory that's being taken where the writer of the psalmist is saying, but I'm not like them. And that can sound sort of self-righteous, but the person is saying, I'm a person of relationship with God. I walk in relationship to God. This word righteous doesn't mean always does the right thing. It means that I walk in honesty and truth in relationship with God, and I work very hard to do the right thing. And then ask God for forgiveness when I don't. This is the definition of a righteous person. You move along in the relationship with God and own up to the truth of what needs to be owned up to and depend on God. So the psalmist is saying, look, that's who I am, and yet I have these enemies that are forming against me, and they look like they can do me some real harm. What happens right smack in the middle of this development of the real fears that we have in life is that the psalmist finds a rock to put his feet on and becomes very confident. There's a restoration of confidence that happens in the journey of the writing of the psalm. Let me see if I can read to you the part where the change is. How can you say to me, flutter like a bird to the mountains? For look, the wicked are bending the bow and have fitted their arrows into the bowstring to shoot in the dark. There it is. They're taking any opportunity they can to try to get right at me. The foundations are indeed being torn down. What has the righteous done? Now, the commentator says this part in verse 3 could be what's a righteous person to do? What am I supposed to do in this kind of situation? And that ends that part of the fear. Who will deliver me from this? Then the psalmist, it occurs to the psalmist this phrase, the Lord is in his holy temple, and the Lord's throne is in the heavens. It's almost like the writer has begun to hear an organ playing "Great is thy faithfulness" off in the distance somewhere. And the strength of that confidence of God's faithfulness to us begins to seep into the life of the psalmist in a way that isn't, it's not sequential. It just happens. This confidence in faith comes as the person of faith begins to think about who God is. It reminds me of the psalm, I think it was Psalm number 2, that the psalmist was directed not to be looking at the enemy, but to lift their eyes and to look at God, to allow the vision of who God is, even in the place of fear and worry and real threat to life or to way of life. The Lord is in God's holy temple. The Lord's throne is in the heavens. His eyes see. His eyelids scrutinize the sons of man. God, who is God? God is not fooled by these plans, these evil plans. There's no guarantee I'm going to live, but God knows what's going on. The Lord tests the righteous, but the wicked and the one loving violence, his soul hates. So the psalmist is talking about a kind of a two-edged event here. Believers, people who try to journey through life with trust in God, know that events come along that do test the faith of a person. That's just the way it is. And sometimes the idea is if we can embrace the test or the trial, it actually can increase our faith. We can become stronger as some of the unhelpful fear and worry is burned up in the fire of the crisis. We have no choice. We trust in God. And so by that, they talk about the refiner's fire, the trial that comes from God that actually makes us stronger. What doesn't kill you makes you stronger, right? Isn't it how the the song goes. There is that side of this which the psalmist is drawing on in his mental journey. He's saying, now wait a minute, what are the steps that I live by? What is the faith that I live by? God is still in control of the world. And it can be that these kinds of trials will build strength for me. Okay, that's pretty confident. That's a pretty confident statement coming from in the life of this person who is fearful for their life. I can be stronger because of this experience. But the other side of the flaming sword, if you will, is that unrighteous people do not grow in faith because of temptation or because of trials. The unrighteous, the wicked, the people who are planning and devising destruction and evil against him, for them, this will be an opportunity for a different kind of fire to rain down from God. They will be destroyed by their own initiatives. They will be destroyed. They will not win. Now, these are cosmic thoughts. They're 30,000, a view from 30,000 feet coming up out of, maybe flying like a bird and not flying away to the woods in flight or in fright, but taking a higher view and saying, look, God is still in control of the world. And God does test those of us who seek to walk with God. And the confidence comes with a two sense of it. In the one hand, God is in God's holy temple, which means God is right here with me. God is right here with me. That's a big part of where this confident wave comes from. You know, God is right here with me. And that's the immanent sense of God with the believer. Builds confidence and subdues fear. Then this transcendent thing of God is also in control of the world. Both parts. God is both immanent and therefore present with him in crisis, but also transcendent and in control of the apparent chaos of that crisis. There's a metaphor of what would be commonplace. Sometimes in the psalmist they'll talk about a potter shaping clay and bringing the clay up and then pushing it down to refine it. In this case, the metaphor is the iron worker, the person who tests metals, testing, proving, and assaying. The metals are they're tested by fire, and that image is right here in the center of how the psalmist begins to think about their plight, and it gives them strength. That's the point. All of a sudden, from within, like an injection, they begin to be strong and be able to gain confidence. God sees all, even the deeds that are done in the darkness. The testing of the righteous, though it might involve great hardship, would culminate in purity and removal of the dross. But the testing of the wicked, the ones loving violence, presumably indicates that the psalmist's particular enemies were violent people. They evoke the divine hatred. So the very thing that can purify and strengthen the believer and the one who is seeking to walk in relationship to God is also the very same thing that will lead to the destruction of those who seek to destroy him. In the life of faith, confidence is both a necessity and a virtue. It's a necessity because the lack of confidence in our lives can contribute to the disintegration of life into fear and anxiety. Boy, do I know that. You know that? Do you know that feeling at all? You lose your confidence. And when you lose your confidence, when your confidence goes out the door, what races in the door before it shuts is fear and anxiety. And that sucks out of life its very purpose. It drains life. And, and the confidence that we are to have. Now, this is really interesting. I love this. The confidence that we are to have is not a confidence in ourselves. Notice, where does the strength for the turn of mind come from? The confidence that is essential to a life that feels like worth living comes from God. It comes from our confidence in God, not a confidence in ourselves. Confidence in ourselves is valuable, no doubt about it. But it is a confidence in God that turns the psalmist's life around. So this confidence that was stirred in a time of crisis, the psalmist sought refuge in the Lord. And yet his friends have warned him about how dangerous it is. But the psalmist's growth in confidence, that's what the psalm is really about. The psalm describes a very human experience of vulnerability and fear and overwhelming loss of confidence and anxiety, maybe the urge to flee. And in the middle of that, it changes. And don't you wish you had a formula for how to make that happen? It changes. In this case, the psalmist's confidence change did not come in a prayer. Confidence emerged from an intentional mental sense of viewing God, of allowing your mind and your heart to rise to the point of that saying, which is, God has the whole world in God's hands. And you don't have to reason out the particulars of that. That's not the point of it. It's that cosmic view which releases in us the opportunity for some confidence to rush back in the door. God is ultimately sovereign in all crises. In this balanced assessment, the psalmist perceives something more than the immediacy of the crisis. Crisis may create a time of testing, and the end result would be disaster for the wicked, but people of faith could emerge beyond the trial as a better person, perceiving the face of God even more clearly. The culmination of this person's crisis was not prayer, but it was, and pardon the religious sounding of this language, it was praise. It was bringing to mind who is God, and who is God in the give and take of the relationships of the world. For when the time comes to stand and be tested, it is not just a gritty endurance which is looked for, but a vision of God which is different. A vision of God which is with us, who is with us, and will be with us even to the end of the age. Even if we die, even if our enemies prevail, the confidence here is that enemies cannot get what they want by being violent and being enemies. Their end is sure. So my friends, that's the word for the day. The timing would be wonderful if you happen to be yourself in the middle of a crisis. I think every day has crises of different levels. And sometimes when everything is good, I can invent a sense of crisis and fear all on my own. The remedy, the antidote for that is to turn your eyes and your mind upon God. This world happens in the view of God, who sees even in the darkness, who sees into the dark hearts of those who would seek your demise. And there is a confidence that emerges in the power and the strength of God, in the position of God in the creation, that says, in the end, right will prevail. Thank you for coming and sharing in this time. I know it's been a brief session today, but it's a short psalm, and we've read through it. I hope it's helpful to you, and we'll be back next Wednesday, and we'll read Psalm 12. Maybe for some of the very short Psalms, we'll do 2 Psalms in one, especially if they're thematically linked. But for today, this is our installment in the Psalms. Again, I'm Pastor Lou Kilgore, ministering here at the High Mountain Presbyterian Church in Franklin Lakes. Happy to have joined with you in this little moment of thought and encouragement. I hope it's helpful to you for your day today. God bless you, my friends, and I will see you next time.